My name is Kennedy Okera. I'm the CTO co-founder at Mitigant. And let's start right away. I think I have to share my slides. Let me just do that right away. All right. All right, I believe my slides are quite visible now. So, all right, so today we're in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about achieving compliance in cloud native infrastructure. We will look at a couple of things, including challenges and best practices. So regarding the agenda, what are the topics that we're going to cover? Firstly, we will try to define cloud native infrastructure. Then we will look at different cloud and compliance standards. And then the challenges, the obstacles that prevent companies or make it difficult for companies to become compliant. We're going to look at that and then how to overcome these challenges. And then the final last topic is going to be about continuous cloud compliance. So let's lay the foundation, because I'm not very sure about the audience, about the experience, about the experience they've had regarding cloud native infrastructure. So in order to lay a very good example, or a good foundation, let us take the definition that is provided by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the CNCF. So basically, they defined cloud native technologies here and not infrastructure. And the reason is because cloud native infrastructure is it's a little bit cumbersome to define in a very nice way. So what's the definition? They define cloud native technologies. They say cloud native technologies empower organizations to build and run scalable applications in modern dynamic environments, such as public, private, and hybrid clouds, containers, service meshes, microservices, immutable infrastructure, and declarative APIs exemplify this approach. So you'll observe that actually the last sentence in this description actually talks about infrastructure, right? Talking about the building blocks for cloud native infrastructure. So let's go to the other part of this. It's a two-part description, by the way. So the other part is these techniques enable loosely coupled systems that are resilient, manageable, and observable. Combined with robust automation, they allow engineers to make high-impact changes frequently and predictably with minimal thought. Quite a mouthful, I know. But the point I want to make here is they're basically talking about the advantages, right? Why do people decide to go this path? Why do they decide to adopt cloud native infrastructure? And I've just outlined just 5 advantages or benefits of using cloud native infrastructure based on this definition and a couple of other definitions. The first advantage is agility, right? So how to rapidly develop, test, launch, and iterate on businesses. This is a big one because, and traditional systems are not able to be agile. And we must have seen this during the COVID-19 pandemic, when all of a sudden companies started adopting the cloud because they wanted to be agile, they wanted to move fast, and the cloud gave them these benefits. And as you know, cloud native infrastructure, they basically inherit virtually every benefit that the cloud offers. The next is resilience. So it offers the ability to adapt to changes, in the infrastructure, including failures, which is kind of one of the things that people encounter when they adopt the cloud. Observability is a big one because it allows for gaining insights, for understanding the processes, the activities that are happening in the cloud. Elasticity, ability to grow and shrink resources as required. This is a huge one, especially for like e-commerce platforms where they have, they have traffic that is unpredictable and they need to scale and shrink back. So they need to be elastic, and this is one of the benefits of cloud native infrastructure. And the last one is cost. This is really kind of, it is a little bit complicated to explain, but we know that the cloud offers a pay-as-you-go model. So you can only pay for, or you will only pay for the resources that you consume. And it basically explains some of these other advantages as I've already enumerated. So it helps to keep things cheaper than trying to run the show by yourself. So in order to summarize what we have, the definitions we just looked at, this diagram, which is basically a diagram provided by the Kubernetes security team based on the concept of 4 C's of cloud native security, they have basically tried to put all this definition in a picture, right? Which is a little bit also not so easy. So let's start from the inner circle here, or the inner triangle actually. So the code. So the code actually refers to things like the application code as written by developers, as well as things like Lambda functions or serverless services. Then the next level is container, which basically the most popular kind of technology here are Docker containers. Then we have this other level, which is the cluster. So Kubernetes is also the major one. The point to note here is there are multiple or different kinds of Kubernetes distributions. You have EKS, you have ECS. These are kind of agnostic, and these are really provided by Amazon Web Services. And you have also similar ones that are provided by, for example, AKS by Azure and Google Cloud, Google Kubernetes service also. And the underlying infrastructure is the cloud itself, right? So the cloud is a platform upon which cloud native infrastructure is built upon, right? So when we get to this later, talking about complexity, which is kind of another let's say challenge that people who adopt the cloud or adopt cloud native infrastructure face. All right, so now that we have laid the foundation for cloud native infrastructure, let us look at compliant standards. So currently there are multiple compliance standards, and these standards are based on different parameters, or they're based on they come from different dimensions. So you got things like the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is primarily based, is from the United States. It's based on the government regulations. However, there are a lot of companies that kind of adopt it. You have compliance standards like HIPAA, which is also for the US, but it's kind of more aligned to health-based organizations, medical institutions, and so forth. The Center for Internet Security is another compliance standard. It is really aligned with more in general, they define rules for information security, for cyber security, and these days also they define specific benchmarks for virtually every cloud service provider. So there are a lot of them. These are just examples of, let's say, the more popular compliance standards. So the next thing I want to talk about is, why should you even be compliant in the first place? What are the benefits? What are the motivations? And here there's a lot of motivations why companies put in a lot of effort to become compliant. Of course, the first one here is adherence to specifications, right? So most companies want to be law-abiding. They want to abide to the regulations that have been set by their countries, by their industry, the industries that they service, and therefore they kind of want to conform to whatever compliance standard that is already recommended in that industry. Of course, there is a huge motivation not to be fined. Usually, these are like laws, and laws always have penalties for companies or for people who violate them. So for a big one is the GDPR, which is very big in Europe. It talks about a lot of data protection, regulations. And here, a lot of companies have been fined. Even big companies have been fined because they were found to have violated GDPR. Of course, security is another kind of motivation for being compliant. People want to use it as a benchmark for demonstrating how secure their infrastructure is. Obviously, we have spoken with a lot of CISOs, and they kind of are motivated to kind of to align with different kinds of compliance, because it helps them to move the needle from being very insecure to somewhere much better secure. And of course, I think the biggest motivation for people that we speak with is they want to gain trust. They want to gain trust before their customers, before their partners. They want people to trust them. They want to have like that label. They don't want people to second guess whether their infrastructure is secure or not. And so what happens is they pick a compliance standard, they go through it, they get a compliance, and then they proudly display, maybe they have something like a badge or some kind of evidence. They show it everywhere on their homepage, in their documents that they are compliant. So I think this is the biggest motivation, or let's say the benefit for being compliant. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the workflow for becoming compliant. Of course, I'm not an auditor. I'm not a trained auditor. So I'm basically talking about this workflow purely from my experience, having worked in the industry, having supported companies that I worked before to get compliant. So there's a huge getting compliant or becoming compliant with a specific benchmark is a lot of work to be done. It entails a lot of stuff to be done. So I'm just going to be summarizing some of these here. So of course, the first thing you want to do is to select a compliance standard. And this is really contextual to your industry, to your vertical, to what your goals are, but you have to start from somewhere. Now, after doing that, the next thing is to really understand the requirements for the compliance standard. Usually in some companies, they have to, even for the requirements, they have to read a lot of documentation. They have to speak with auditors. They have to speak with consultants. They have to speak with maybe some experts somewhere, because you have to understand the kinds of checks that are expected that are part of the compliance benchmark. And that also kind of depends on your infrastructure. As we saw before, if you're using things like Lambda functions, or you're using containers, or all of this infrastructure might have a little bit difference. They might have their own kind of specific compliance benchmarks, and you have to be well informed about it. There are documentations that are going to be reviewed by the auditors. They will want some kind of evidence that that what you claim to have done is actually in place. So you have to get all of these documentations ready. There's also like timelines for the audit inspection, so you have to like align with the auditor and understand what kind of timelines they have put in place. There are auditors that have to be there physically to inspect like server, some kind of maybe the server room where you keep some access controls, or where you keep some kind of resources, or they might want to inspect other things like the physical PCs that are communicating to the cloud and things like that. Of course, I think this is just kind of my own look, my own kind of personal perspective here, that you should conduct your own self audits. What I mean by self audits is, before you kind of trigger the whole process, you want to like have a certain level of preparation, and that means you have to like check how good you are at that point in time. What levels of compliance have you been able to achieve? Is there any way you can actually push it a little bit to be much better? Then of course you have to decide on the actual audit date when you will speak with the auditor, when the auditor will do the actual compliance. You have to decide, this has to be done in conjunction with your team, because as I said before, compliance it takes a lot of things, and you don't want to set it at a time where maybe a lot of the team members are either on vacation, or they're not available, or there's some kind of big activity in your company. You want it to be a successful activity. Then I think in the end state is to get a kind of certification. Might be a paper, might be some documentation, it might be something that you can show as an evidence that you have gone through this certification process. So in the end, the auditor is going to give you some kind of paper, or some kind of summary output, so to say, that says whether you passed everything, or you passed some of the checks that were conducted and things like that. You have to get that, and there's always some kind of next steps. Either the auditor wants you to improve on certain areas that he found not to be good enough, Or also, you must understand also compliance, there are different levels. So you might have level 1 of, I think, I remember like the BSI has different levels, and therefore sometimes you have to like move from one level to the other, depending on your goals, or there might be need to recertify. I think some compliance also have maybe some periodic kind of recertifications, like maybe after 6 months you have to do another check in order for you to maintain that certificate, or you have to move to another level. There are different kinds of requirements. So these are things that you have to find out, and you have to kind of put in place and prepare. Now, the next thing we're going to be discussing is about the challenges, right? So anything we want to do, there are always challenges. So what are the challenges to achieving compliance in cloud native infrastructure? A couple of ones we are going to be looking at this evening. The first is the shared responsibility model. So the shared responsibility model is kind of popular in cloud computing domain. It is popular because it is one of the major changes between how cloud systems are run and how traditional on-premises systems are run. And basically what it entails is it basically separates the responsibilities that customers have and the responsibilities that cloud service providers have, right? So this image is kind of nice because actually it's provided by Amazon Web Services. And you will see here in this blue segment that's on top here, that there are various things that as a customer you have to be aware that you are responsible for taking care of security, taking care of compliance. So customer data is entirely what you should do, whether that data is for your employees or for your customers. In case you're offering a service, the security, the compliance of all that data is part of your responsibilities. Other things that you should take care of, things like platforms, applications, identity and access management, operating systems, network and firewall configurations. All these things are part of what you should do. The other things are like encryption of data, whether it's server side or client side encryption, all the traffic analysis, all the things that go in at the network layer, traffic moving from one spot to the other. All of this is part of what you should do as a cloud customer. It's quite a lot of work to do, and most of the time, there's the misunderstanding when we speak with a lot of customers that they expect the cloud service provider to handle some of these things, and it turns out that it's not really true. Of course, the cloud service providers, they also have areas of responsibilities, and part of that are like they are responsible for the physical servers. Remember, in the end of the day, the cloud itself is they're actually physically located somewhere. They're made up of servers that are in big data centers, and everything about this data center, from the physical security to the security of the servers to to other things like making sure that the servers are available, all of that fall under the responsibility of the cloud service provider. So yeah, that's about the shared responsibility model. Now the other challenge is about complexity, right? Complexity it's part and parcel of cloud native infrastructure, right? It is what you face, because it is made up, as we saw in the diagram, it is made up of multiple abstraction layers. So eventually you have a system where, for example, the way the security tools work, they work based on the abstraction layers, right? So for example, the tool that you use for compliance or for checking for compliance for a Docker image will be different in most cases from the tool that you use for checking for Kubernetes, and the one you use for checking for compliance for like Lambda functions might also be different. So this brings in a lot of complexity, which some teams cannot handle. It becomes a blocker for them to be compliant. And this is kind of related to the next challenge, which is about skills and knowledge gap, right? So most companies might not even have the people in hand. They might not have the staff, that can take care of this kinds of problems. So there was a survey done by Tech Target, and here they're basically asking the participants about how to take care of of security issues in the public cloud. And as you can see from the results of the survey, 36% of them hand over this responsibility to information security people. And you must understand that information security is a huge domain. So there are people I've spoken with before. They have been in information security for 20 years. They know nothing about the cloud. It's like completely green to them. So this 36%, there is no guarantee that these folks will do a good job. And as you can see, there are there are people who are not sure of who should do what. There are people who hand over these responsibilities to some managed service providers. Interestingly, there's like 4% that they hand it over to the CISO. So CISO, the way and manner he takes care of compliance entirely is his own business. So how do we go about overcoming these challenges? So a couple of points that we're going to discuss. First is, naturally, you want to hire people, right? This will be like the first thought that will come to to the minds of most people who operate in a company. You want to hire security engineers. You want to build an in-house team. But that comes with its own setbacks, right? So I've tried to enumerate here kind of for a cloud security engineer, the skills that a cloud security engineer needs to have for him to function well. So he needs to understand things around application security, network security, incident response, DevSecOps, vulnerability assessment, and many more. So because the cloud it brings different technologies together. So you have to get such a person. There might be the need for you to like train these people. And of course, there's the challenge of retaining them, right? Because these are people who are highly sought after, and they might get more lucrative offers from other companies, and they might be in that position where they're struggling even to remain. So you have to figure out how you can keep them. And in the end, this boils down to, to a lot of expenses. It takes time to hire people. It takes time to groom them. It takes time to bring them up to speed with the expectations. So this is a big challenge. So the other way you can go around, navigating around this challenge, this compliance challenge, is for you to leverage security and compliance services that are offered by the cloud service providers. Like for example, I'm using Amazon Web Services for most of my examples here. On Amazon Web Services, they provide over 10 security services, and usually a lot of people are kind of overflowed with this. So I've brought out a very simple example to kind of show one possibility here. So Amazon Web Services has a product called the Audit Manager. And so what the Audit Manager does is to help or to simplify the process of getting compliant, becoming compliant. So it basically helps you to gather evidence. It helps you to get to go through the processes. So eventually, what it does is to communicate with the other security tools and services that we saw in the last slide. And you can define things like, maybe you have a custom framework you want to align with, or you want to use some frameworks that are already defined in one of the services. You can basically define all of that here. In the end, you see here that it's going to generate audit-ready reports, which you will basically take to the auditor, and he will use it as a basis for assessing how you're ready for the compliance. Yeah, and another way you can actually overcome these compliance challenges is by using third-party cloud security software as a service solution. So this is another way, because basically what we saw in the last example, where we're basically talking about how we can use services that are provided by AWS, is they are basically providing some of these things you see here, either cloud security posture management, or cloud identity entitlement management. I wouldn't go through describing what all of these tools do, but essentially, as you see in this diagram here, there is an overlap of what these tools do, and the AWS services actually perform some of these duties. The major difference is that these kinds of third-party tools, they go much deeper. They provide some value-added services that are not offered on AWS. They actually make it much easier for normal people to use, people who are not experts in security or not experts in compliance management, and they just make it super simple for people to go from not being compliant to becoming compliant, and they even take care of other things like like security. All right, so I want to talk maybe on a last note here about continuous compliance, continuous cloud compliance, right? So all the steps I've given before now are basically based on the fact that you're doing compliance in a one-time way. So you're not doing it continuously. You just prepare all the evidence for the auditor. The auditor comes and gives you and checks and probably gives you the certificate at the end of the day. And that is great, that is good, but it has multiple problems. One of the major problem is, the cloud is very dynamic, and it turns out that if you're compliant today, the following day you might not be compliant because of changes that might occur in your cloud infrastructure. So continuous compliance is kind of aligned with the kind of DevOps strategy that we hear today. We have continuous integration, we have continuous development, because you want to continuously deploy your applications. You want to continuously serve customers. You want to be agile, and this method of being agile is kind of what continuous cloud compliance kind of presents. You want to have a compliant by default posture, meaning that at every point in time you are continuously checking how compliant you are with one or more compliance benchmarks. And this has a lot of benefits. One of the major benefits here is that it simplifies the effort you need to actually go from one compliance benchmark to the other. Because as it turns out, most of the compliance standards or benchmarks basically have overlaps. Like, you will realize that probably what PCI DSS checks, they might be checking for S3 buckets. When you have a look at what NIST checks, you see they also check for S3 buckets, whether they are publicly exposed. So the idea that you're always checking makes it super easier for you to move from one benchmark to the other one. It also helps you to be secure. There's kind of a little difference between security and compliance, and oftentimes people mix it together. Compliance is kind of something you achieve at a point in time, and security is something you always do, because we know that the attackers, they don't sleep. There's always a threat knocking at the door. So continuous compliance kind of helps you to be somewhere in between just being compliant to being secure, and it's a nice way to actually maintain a robust and cloud security posture. Then, of course, this is a direct benefit of the previous points. So you want to prevent attacks. You want to prevent data breaches. You don't want to be in the news. You don't want your reputation to get damaged because of a successful attack. And of course, there is a huge. There are fines that occur each time companies are go through this kind of attack. Either fines are coming because they did not align with some compliance requirements, or they have to investigate and report to the authorities. They have to investigate and clearly tell their customers what happened. And of course, they have to investigate so that it doesn't, that data breach does not repeat itself again. So basically, by being continuously compliant, you're basically, using one stone to kill many birds, as they say it. You're not just getting the compliant, getting the benchmark, but you're also at the same time helping yourself to proactively prevent attacks or data breaches, or keeping your reputation intact and things like that. All right, so at this point in time, I just want to talk a little bit about Mitigant. So because we have been in the cloud industry for a while, in terms of expertise. Obviously, the company is still young, but the founders themselves are kind of veterans. So we have seen these problems, which is one of the reasons for which we formed the company. So we provide a very intuitive and modern CSPM, which helps people who want to be secure, who want to be compliant, to achieve these goals. So basically, we reduce drastically the amount of effort that is required for you to learn about cloud security, about the cloud, about compliance, about different kinds of things that that are required for you to become compliant. Obviously, there is some kind of competitive pricing models, which if you're really interested, just speak to us, and we're happy to give you more information about that. I think this last point is super important because we have seen companies that kind of struggle to fit into some of the ways of overcoming these challenges that I mentioned. They're trying to have their staff. They want their staff to take care of all of these things. In the end, they have a strain on manpower, and the staff are basically struggling to keep up with their traditional or their core business objectives, and things like security and compliance. So basically, Mitigant helps to take away all of these pains, so you can basically focus on your core business objectives. All right, so that brings me to the end of the webinar, my presentation, and I think I will hand over at this point in time to Niels for the next part of the webinar.